Macron betrayed Merz. Financial Times reveals details of the biggest surprise at the EU summit and how Kremlin preemptively rejects most Ukraine, yes, EU proposals on peace plan. We will talk about this with political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member Alexandra Filippenko. Alexandra, glad to see you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Alexandra, Ukraine and the United States held a series of substantive meetings in Miami from December 19th to December 21st, focusing on 4 key documents that are part of a future peace agreement, according to Rustem Umerov, Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, and US Special Envoy Steve Witkov. According to Umerov, over the 3 days in Florida, the Ukrainian delegation held a series of productive and constructive meetings with American and European partners. So how would you assess the significance of the series of meetings in Miami for the diplomatic process regarding Ukraine? And how important is it that the meetings focused on 4 key documents of a future peace agreement? Your opinion?
Well, first of all, we must say that these meetings were focused on alignment, not final decisions. And it's very important to understand that we don't have any final decisions. There are still so many issues, so many questions, so many things that need to be discussed. And Vladimir Zelensky said it himself. He flagged some unresolved issues like occupied territories, like Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, like security guarantees for Ukraine and post-war reconstruction. But for now, as of now, and at least that's what we've learned from Mr. Umerov's and Mr. Witkov's posts, that these productive and constructive conversations were focused on alignment. That it's not final. There's need for more and more discussions. And the key discussed areas, the 20-point peace plan, the military security, some different security guarantees, and the economic issues. These are all things that need to be discussed more and more and more. So on the one hand, I don't think that, at least we cannot see that there is something productive or something conclusive that came out of these meetings. But it's very important that the meetings are going on. Maybe it's just too much attention drawn to that right now, because of course the peace process needs our attention, it needs everyone's attention. But it looks like this process will be going on for some time, or at least, as Marco Rubio, State Secretary, said, maybe for a few months. And as of now, no final decisions, only alignment, only just checking the positions of one another. And we really needed to curb our expectations, let's say. Our expectations were a little higher. So that's why I would say that I wanted to see some conclusive, let's say, texts and what was achieved. No, nothing like that. But it's alignment. It's also very important. So in any case scenario, it's very good that the negotiations are going on.
Alexandra, we see that French President Emmanuel Macron stated over the weekend that it would be useful for Europe to resume dialogue with Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin. In response, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that Putin is ready to engage in dialogue with Macron. On Sunday, the Elysee Palace welcomed the Kremlin statement. It added that in the coming days, it would decide under what conditions the talks could take place. What are realistic expectations for what such dialogue could achieve in the near term?
Well, for Kremlin, it's also important to continue some kind of dialogue, because they want to showcase to the Trump administration that they're willing to talk. So that is why any kind of negotiation with Europe, with European counterparts, with European countries is important for the Russian side, for the Kremlin. They want to confirm to President Trump, Russia wants to confirm to President Trump that they are in the process of negotiation. Although it's highly doubtful to my mind that there is actually any kind of process of negotiation on the Russian side. The Russian side is acting to show that they are talking, that they are discussing something, that they are moving into some kind of a direction, although nothing is actually happening. We don't see any move. They don't move an inch to any direction, to European direction, Ukrainian direction, American direction, because let's remember the President Trump's idea of ceasefire was never supported by Russia. It's always been supported by Ukraine. Many times, President Trump has said that both sides need to just stop and go home, and afterwards start talking and start discussing. The main thing is for fighting to stop right now. That's what President Trump said many times. And the Russian side has repeatedly said that only a peace plan is workable. They need a full peace plan. They don't need a ceasefire right now. And that's made President Trump uncomfortable. And we saw a few times that he expressed his concerns regarding Putin and regarding Kremlin and regarding their willingness to negotiate. So right now, it's a possibility to show that Russia is actually negotiating, that Russia is actually doing something, that Russia is actually reacting or thinking about something, although, well, we understand that they might be just dragging their feet. And this opportunity to talk to Europe, although it, on the one hand, on the surface, it looks as if Russia is trying to push Europe out of negotiation, and they really don't want to see Europe negotiating, especially supporting Ukraine. But on the other hand, they need to show President Trump that they are engaged in some kind of negotiations. So that is why it's a good opportunity for them.
Alexandra, a little bit more about Macron. Macron blocked Merz's plan for Russia's frozen assets, Financial Times reports. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz tried to persuade EU leaders to use frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine, but faced resistance from France. A quote, "Macron betrayed Merz and he knows there will be a price to pay for this," said a senior EU diplomat, according to Financial Times. What are the possible reasons France under President Macron might resist using frozen Russian assets to aid Ukraine? How might this affect relations between France and Germany in the context of EU policymaking?
We understand that right now it is a fear, let's say, of some European countries, France included, that the usage of Russian frozen assets can lead to less, let's say, the viewpoint of some other countries that invest in Europe might change because of that. There is this fear that the, let's say, the view of the European Union as a safe haven for anyone's investments might change. And we heard that criticism, we heard those ideas, we heard that those fears, I can even say, from many countries of the European Union and from some other players of the international arena. And President Macron seems to be just being the voice of those countries and being the voice of those concerned, of those fearful even that the European Union, if the European Union uses Russian frozen assets, not just percentages from those assets, but the assets themselves, then this will lead to less investment in the European Union, less investment in certain European countries by different countries all around the world. And first of all, we're talking about the Asia-Pacific region, of course, but we should not forget about the Middle East and the Persian Gulf countries that are investing heavily in many European companies, European institutions, not countries, but companies, businesses. So there is this interest, and we might suspect that President Macron was put on the front line, let's say, of this discussion, and he is just portraying and being the voice of those countries that were concerned within the European Union. although he understands that he risks, of course, the fracture in relationship with Germany, the fracture of the relationship with Merz, with Chancellor Merz. But President Macron he sees himself also a leader of the European Union, not a head of the European Union, but one of the major leaders of the European Union. He probably thinks that for him it won't be such a big blow as for other countries that are actually concerned and fearful of using Russian frozen assets. So this might have to do with the fact that President Macron was put on the front line by a group of countries that actually had those concerns.
Alexandra, pressure on Putin must come not only in words but also through actions. So far, however, we are hearing only words. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham urged US President Donald Trump to seize Russian oil tankers if Kremlin dictator Vladimir Putin refuses to enter negotiations regarding Ukraine. NBC News reports the senator's comment came against the backdrop of the US blockade of Venezuela, where sanctioned oil tankers have already been seized for several days. How feasible is Senator Graham's proposal to seize Russian oil tankers? How relevant is the US experience with Venezuela as a precedent for taking similar actions against Russian vessels, for example?
Well, it's very important that Lindsey Graham is saying this. He said it in his multiple interviews, and first time in an interview to NBC News. He said, if Putin says no this time, I hope President Trump will do the following: sign my bill, that bill of 500% tariffs for countries that buy Russian oil, recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism for kidnapping Ukrainian children, and most importantly, detain ships carrying sanctioned Russian oil, as we are doing with Venezuela. And right now, as of now, American military, and not only military, but also Coast Guard, they stopped three Venezuelan tankers, and there are expected to be more. 70% of Venezuelan oil is being exported by the tankers of the Shadow Fleet. Those are tankers that are sanctioned, actually, but they come out to international waters under false flags. And this is the same thing that Russia is doing. Also, under false flags, under false names, under the flags of Guyana or Panama. And then if tankers are stopped, Guyana and Panama say that they have nothing to do with those tankers. They know nothing about those tankers. And this way, Russia was transporting oil to Iran and to China and to different countries, a number of other countries. The same is done by Venezuela. The fact that Lindsey Graham, one of the most famous and popular American politicians and Republican politicians, that's especially important right now, is saying it is quite important. And also, I must stress that Lindsey Graham is one of those Republicans, one of those senators who is going to go to re-election this coming November. In November 2026, during the midterm elections, as usual, as always, the House of Representatives is all congressmen from the House of Representatives are going to be either elected or re-elected, maybe, or they will lose their seats. And for the Senate, it's only 1/3. Only 1/3 of the Senate is going to an election right now. So Lindsey Graham is part of that 30% of senators that is hopefully going to be re-elected this coming November. His 6-year term is coming to an end, so now it's his time to try and have a campaign and be re-elected to the Senate. So right now, he's in a quite vulnerable position. His place is not secured right now. He's vulnerable, so he needs President Trump. He needs President Trump's support. It's not the time to have any kind of rift with the White House. And even though Lindsey Graham right now is, well, he depends quite a lot on President Trump right now for President Trump's support during the re-election campaign. Even though Lindsey Graham is saying all those words, and we should take note of it. Also, it's very similar to my mind. It's very similar to the Macron situation. Lindsey Graham is representing a group of senators. He's representing a group of Republicans, even though all those words, they don't contradict Donald Trump. But as we've been seeing for past few weeks, President Trump doesn't want to push Russia too hard, while Lindsey Graham, who depends on President Trump for support, who is going to re-election in November. This Lindsey Graham is saying, no, President Trump, don't go your way, go my way, and just follow my lead. I know what to do. I have these ideas. Russia is a country state sponsor of terrorism, 500% tariffs, and seizure of oil tankers. Lindsey Graham, I guess, is the representative of a certain view of Republicans, of, let's say, not MAGA Trumpist Republicans, but classic Republicans. And Lindsey Graham, as we all know, has been a long time acquaintance, let's say, and co-author of many, many bills with Marco Rubio, with State Secretary, who was absent during those negotiations in Miami. We didn't see Marco Rubio. We didn't see the State Secretary in Miami. Maybe he was on deep background. Maybe we just didn't see the photographs. But we definitely know that Steve Witkoff was there, Jared Kushner was there, Kirill Dmitriev was there from the Russian side, Rustem Umerov was there from the Ukrainian side. There were representatives of the European Union. We don't know who exactly. But we haven't heard anything about Marco Rubio, about the State Secretary. He seems to be pushed out of the negotiation process, although he's saying it's not true. But hearing Lindsey Graham say that, I couldn't help but wonder if he's representing the views of Republicans, including also the State Secretary Marco Rubio, because all those ideas, and Lindsey Graham is talking about the bills, not just merely ideas, not just words, as you said, but real, actual bills that are that can be voted on, that can go to the floor, to the Senate floor, fairly easily. He's talking about actual bills that can be voted on and signed by President Trump very soon. So hearing that, I suppose Lindsey Graham is also the representative of certain views, of certain part of the Republican Party and of people close to President Trump, but maybe not that powerful, let's say, to say what they think and say what they want President Trump to do regarding Russia.
And NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, in an interview with Bild, said that if China attacks Taiwan, he is convinced that Russia would simultaneously exert pressure on Europe. NATO chief underlined that China is closely monitoring Taiwan and, in the event of military action, would pressure Russia under Putin's leadership to keep Europe on edge. This scenario requires Europe to be prepared with investments in defense and recruitment of the best military personnel available. What would be, in your opinion, the potential consequences for European stability if such a dual pressure scenario occurred?
Well, this is one of the scenarios that the European Union is looking into and NATO is looking into. And it's extremely important to note that they are preparing for that. We may argue, and different think tanks argue all the time, whether Russia actually has any opportunity or any possibility to pressure European countries, the European Union, even more than it pressures it right now. and we are seeing, for example, we saw Russian fighter jets flying into Estonia, or some or drones flying into Poland, or some balloons flying into Lithuania. So is there a possibility for more pressure than now? There are different opinions regarding that, and we've seen quite a few articles in the past few days even that state that the US intelligence agencies and European intelligence agencies believe that Russia is preparing for military action against European countries, although I must say that Tulsi Gabbard, for example, that heads the American intelligence services, Secretary of Intelligence, she said that this is not true, and the American intelligence services do not believe that Russia has the capacity or capabilities to do that. And she posted that on X, saying that Russia doesn't have the capacity or capabilities to occupy Ukraine, let alone try to occupy some European countries. While this is a discussion, the European countries and NATO and the coalition of the willing are thinking about different scenarios. And this is very, very important because, of course, we understand that even in last days prior to February 24th, 2022, many people were saying that, no, of course, Putin is just trying to scare everyone. He is gathering all the military on the border with Ukraine just because he wants a show of force. And some deep intelligence reports that came out later, they said, and they explicitly said, that Putin will wage a war, he will start a war, but we learned about it only afterwards. So right now it's very hard to say what real intelligence is saying, not just sources or especially anonymous sources of even very respected and beloved newspapers like Wall Street Journal or journalists from the Reuters, etc., etc. So it's very important that Europe is preparing, that Europe is weighing all the scenarios, that there are these discussions, these difficult discussions, these discussions that are not supported by many Europeans, and again, the discussions that are used by people like Kirill Dmitriev to say that there are only warmongers that want to break up the peace process that has been started by President Trump. But this is not about warmongering. This is about weighing the scenarios. This is about preparing for the worst case scenario. And this is about just securing your own borders. So this pressure, this double pressure that might happen for European countries would or could have been destructive, very, very destructive for the European Union. But when the European countries and Mark Rutte, as the head of the North Atlantic Organization, if they are working even on the worst case scenarios, then if something like that happens, it wouldn't be such a blow for Europe and for the European Union in general, and for the coalition of the willing, for each and every European country. So the fact that they are working on scenarios, the fact that they're looking into even the worst cases, this brings me personally hope that if something happens, the European Union will be ready for that.
Alexandra, thank you so much for this interview, for this interesting and important conversation. Thanks for supporting Ukraine and Ukrainian people. Alexandra Filippenko, political analyst, European Leadership Network UK member, was with us today. Please share this interview and continue support in Ukraine. Alexandra, I wish you all the best and see you.
See you soon and happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You too.